is Nick Higgins. He is the growth officer from CADL. Basically, you're gaining the opinions of Canadians and how they are focused specifically on travel as it relates to COVID-19. So you're putting a real focus on this. What are some of the things that you've noticed in your report?
Yeah, thanks, Sonia, and thanks for having us on the show. Well, some of the things we've noticed that we found were very interesting was the attitudes of our respondents and Canadians in terms of how they intend to, how they feel their travel behaviour will look like once we're past the crisis. With 30% or 1 in 3 people thinking that they're going to travel less outside of Canada, and what we're seeing is probably a likely increase in staycations, so more domestic travel, staying within Canada.
So are you noticing, you said 1 in 3, so do you think that then that implies that the fear is really going to maintain itself even after the pandemic is over? So they're looking at just the travel within their own country, even after the summer.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of look at in terms of the implications and the lasting effects of a crisis like this. One of the areas we're planning to look into is a little bit more regionality in terms of what areas people are more like or less likely to consider for their travel plans in the future. In terms of fear in the market, I think it's a lot of uncertainty. I think people are just they're not really understanding and how could they, what it might look like post pandemic. You got to think about the impact on airports and social distancing when we actually go back to traveling, and what measures they'll have in terms of controlling any kind of contamination or transfer of the virus. It seems like it's going to be a long period until we really can close the book on this crisis.
And you noticed that, I think you mentioned this a little bit before, but only 33% of Canadians say that they would travel the way that they had before this pandemic.
Correct. Yeah, which we thought was a pretty staggering number. When you think of the size of the travel industry and how accustomed we've gotten to in the more globalized world recently, it's kind of frightening to think what kind of change that is in terms of behavior.
Right. And is there a difference between the younger generation in terms of how they are viewing travel versus the older demographic? Is there a difference in perspective?
Yeah, there absolutely is. We've seen generational differences in a number of the surveys we've done over the weeks. In terms of travel, we've got younger generations are actually less likely to want to travel. They're feeling a little bit more. I think it's one of the things we've evaluated is it's likely the first major event of this nature in the lifetime of younger generations and Gen Z. So when we looked at the data, we've seen that this kind of crisis is actually on par superseding as how Gen Z would see climate change, which is one of the only other real, in their lifetime, memorable crises, which was still kind of bubbling. I know it is obviously a major crisis, but they don't have that recall towards that 9/11 or the 2008, 2009 financial crisis.
The travel industry in general was so big. Do you have those numbers? Do you know what they were and what that really means in terms of lost revenue of the travel industry?
I know that in terms of the airline industry, the one positive is, at least from a technology perspective, they're moving into times where things like 3D printing will reduce their operational costs in terms of cost. So one of the things we haven't looked at it during our research. We looked at it in terms of, well, how is the airline industry going to look and how will they rebound? And it was one of the interesting insights we found was that it's projected that type of technology can give 75% price reductions or cost reductions in terms of overheads for airlines. So I think that's one of the areas where with reduced. These airlines are obviously built for huge capacity, and with reduced capacity, hopefully maybe there's a silver lining. It's an opportunity to focus on some other areas of the business that can help them ride the ship, stabilize, and kind of get to the point where travel is something that can be more accepted again, and where we're not seeing 1 in 3 people thinking about reducing their kind of typical travel patterns.
Right. How long do you think this is going to last? I mean, it's hard to predict how long the pandemic will last, but do you have a sense of how long this fear might last and impact the industry?
The vaccine seems to be a key piece,
Right.
or that is a key piece, and that's a 12 to 18 month process. We're going to be probably dealing with restrictions until like right through to 2021. So I think that has a lasting impact.
And what are some of the key findings of this report? I know you mentioned a few at the top, but anything that really surprised you or that are really jarring?
Yeah, we saw like it was 35% of people had vacations booked in the next 6 months. So they were booked, tickets paid, ready to go. And 90% of those respondents expected that to be impacted, which I think is it really put into perspective like what to expect. Like, it was pretty striking to see that type of response. 90% of all people that have something in the next 6 months to say, I really expect it to be impacted. So we found that somewhat surprising in terms of the findings. So
how is this data in terms of COVID-19 and people's attitudes in terms of travel? How has that helped your clients? What are they looking for?
It's helped them understand just how quickly attitudes are shifting. We'll run questions that we've ran in the past 6 or 9 months ago and get a comparison in terms of how those attitudes may have changed, or that consumption pattern may have changed. So in terms of like how frequently they're traveling, which is obviously now down to next to zero, as well as what types of interests or behaviors they have in terms of consumption. So what we do, what we work on there is kind of keeping our panel of members engaged with fresh content that we fund to help our customers then understand what demand makes sense for their data strategy. So I guess our daily survey ends up becoming this key piece, this key kind of moderated piece between Cattle clients and members that helps give each a lens to the other.
Advice would be for our clients right now based on the data that you've been collecting?
We're really looking at a couple different things. We're looking at we're kind of providing the advice that consumer behaviors, attitudes are changing. So make sure that your defensive data strategy, which is everything you collect from your sales monthly, your web traffic, make sure that you're kind of paying attention to that and monitoring if you're having any significant changes in interest, which would be your traffic or clicks or ads like that, and your sales, because there's many companies that are expecting, they're seeing one way or the other, they're seeing a decrease in sales, which we see on the restaurants, and kind of really feeling for anyone that's been in the service side, where they're seeing that big decrease. And then on the other side, in certain areas, consumer packaged goods, they can't keep the products, they can't keep manufacturing fast enough. So two very different challenges, but both market driven. So we're advising, really trying to think about what's your positioning going to be in a market like this? Like, how are you going to offer support and make sure that consumers understand the difficulties that your company's having, whether it is positive or negative, and ensure that you give back and provide a platform for people to be able to look at your brand in a way that you contributed.
What would you say to, let's say, Air Canada, any airline as an example? What should they be doing now, to avoid, bankruptcy or huge layoffs? I mean, I know they've already laid off so many, but what is your advice to them? How do they stay relevant? How do they stay connected to their client base?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's the one, a lot of our clients on the media agency side have been looking at that, every which direction and how an airline can stay relevant at this time. It's, I think it's important that they engage with their customer base and try and understand, I think it's very difficult in that you're seeing such loss in revenues. And it's difficult to make decisions. I think, kind of really get an understanding of consumers and what they expect from an airline in terms of safe travel in the future would be a key area. Obviously, I think from the advertising side, like any way that you can be involved in the positive, good side of the pandemic would be positive. So as an airline, providing transportation of PPE would probably be a very good cause for an Air Canada to be able to be involved in. And then supporting staff. So really just, it's kind of like humane side. So
do you think that people, as you said before, do you think people would be more willing to travel if they knew that there was screening before they entered a plane and that they wouldn't be sharing that facility, that plane, with someone who might be sick? Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think it would be. I think, there's a high sensitivity to this. I think if there's any measures that can be taken, that screening will be an interesting one. I'm not sure how feasible some of these are. I'm not too sure. But yeah, there's definitely a number of areas that could be looked at in terms of increasing trust and kind of reducing kind of the anxiety that may go with travel at this time.
Great. Thank you. So we'll have to have you on again after your next report gets published. We can talk a little bit more about that and have this ongoing dialogue about consumers' attitudes and how they're changing during the COVID-19. Thank you, Mick Higgins from CADL.